Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and this here is my good friend, Andrew O'Neill. I'm actually joining Andy at his place because I came to Front Royal in order to help my son move into college. He's actually sitting right over here on my right. And so I'm traveling, but since technology is portable, so am I, and here we are. We're going to cover quite a bit this evening. I'm going to give you an update on some of the things that we've got going on at the Lepanto Institute. And before we get into any of that, let's go ahead and do what we always do and open with our prayer. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora nostra morte. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So the first thing I want to kind of fill you in on is that we have been working on a report on the AUSCP for the better part of a month and a half. We've released some information that we've put together on them, especially from their little June assembly, which was a lot of fun. But the story that we have coming out ties in very much with what's going on in the various synods that are taking place around the world. And the reason that it ties in is because the AUSCP, and this is what's going to come out in our report on Monday, the AUSCP is not just a member. They're one of the founding members of something called the International Church Reform Network. Now, I've reported on that before. We've put together a report on their participation with this thing. It was spearheaded by a heretic from Germany. This guy's name is Father Helmut Schuler. Other members of the ICRN include the Irish Association of Catholic Priests, which is much more overtly worse than the American Association of Catholic Priests. But what they're doing, they are actively talking about pushing for women's ordination to the priesthood. But what's interesting is that they got pushback in the meetings. So in the meetings of the ICRN, some of the priests, they didn't identify who, some of the priests protested and said, well, we can't just outright support this. We need to do this incrementally. And so what they would do is they would support the idea that, well, maybe what we ought to do is push for women's ordination to the diaconate. And then we should push for women to be put into positions of authority. Where have we heard that before?
Yeah. This is one of those things that, the incremental approach, you hear about the frog in the boiling water, which is ridiculous because a frog will jump out of the boiling water.
Yes.
The second it starts to boil, he's just going to go. But the idea is sound. And this is how, we were talking about Saul Alinsky earlier today. And this is, he didn't invent this method, but this is something that the left has capitalized on and uses all the time. So Where have we heard this before? Everywhere, literally everywhere. There is not a part of the church or our country's government or any other country's government, the UN. This is how corruption creep happens incrementally, always. Creep.
Yeah.
And when the revolution starts, you think, what a surprise. Oh no, here's Lenin and he's leading these people and it's only been a month. And no,
he just showed up out of nowhere.
Right. No, he'd been going at it for years. He'd been arrested. He'd been a foreign dignitary. I mean, this is...
Yep. He hid out in Germany, of all places.
Of course. Well, the Germans are the ones that sent him into Russia to destabilize the Russian government during World War I. And
amazing. Then, of course, he decided to return the favor by saying, we should push on to Russia or push on to Germany, liberate the Germans. Yeah. So it's always about liberation when they want to enslave you.
Sure. Well, even back then, it's controlling the conversation.
Yes. Controlling the narrative.
The language, control the conversation.
So in terms of controlling the narrative, the AUSCP and its cohorts over at the ICRN, they talked about how important it was to put women in leadership positions in the church.
Right.
One of the things they specified was that they wanted women to have decision-making abilities with regard to maybe the placement of bishops, which Pope Francis
Right.
just recently did. So when people say, oh, they're just a bunch of aging hippies, it's just let the biological option phase them out. It doesn't work that way, folks, because what's happening is that they are in positions of influence, and like revolutionaries, even though they themselves may be on the way out, they're going to put their cronies in place in order to carry on the revolution afterward. How come Cuba is still a communist country?
I mean, if it were true that bad ideas eventually die out, then we wouldn't ever have to fight them because they would just die out.
Right.
The biological option, even if it works, takes decades.
Yep.
But there's a reason that, when, Roe v. Wade's overturned, and as we were discussing earlier,
There's a lot of work to be done.
Suddenly, I mean, pro-lifers are probably as shocked as anybody else that it actually happened. And
right.
These people who are now moving a little bit more, toward the Democrats, and they're so angry that a right was taken away from them. They've been lied to for 50 years or more in some cases, and they don't understand. Like 50 years is a long time.
Oh yeah.
Like that's grandparent age for some people, right? And you don't just let the biological option take care of that, right? You've got to work against it and speak against it and take them seriously when they talk about the incremental things that they're going to do. Yeah. I have noticed lately people, when I have been in discussions with people that are more on the leftward side of the aisle or the left portion of the sphere, or however you want to say it, they have become fond lately of saying there is no slippery slope.
Really?
That's a false concept, you see.
Is it really? Well, I mean, it's technically a logical fallacy. It's called the slippery slope fallacy.
Right.
But at the same time, there is such a thing as stepping over into, what do they call it in terms of black hole physics? You hit the event horizon.
And then there's a point of no return. I mean, look, anybody who has gone sledding and accidentally fallen down the hill before you get on the sled knows that slippery slopes are real things that exist, and that the principle of, oops, one wrong step, oops, another wrong step, oh no, my feet, and then you're tumbling.
Oh no, I started an avalanche, So in any event, the way this kind of ties in, we started an avalanche.
Right? Okay.
The way this ties in with the synods is that we're starting to hear reports coming out of Germany. We're also hearing reports coming out of the Netherlands and from England and from several other countries where they're saying, well,
Ireland most
recently, we need to incorporate some pastoral moves in order to bring about an acceptance of same-sex relationships, whether it's in the form of same-sex marriages, or the more incremental approach is to say, we need to start baptizing children of homosexual couples.
Oh, yeah.
Now, why would that be a problem, we think? The reason it's a problem, first of all, the church has always said that you only baptize the babies of parents who are clearly going to be raising the child in the Catholic faith. If a Protestant couldn't walk into a Catholic church and say, we'd like you to baptize our baby.
Right.
Okay. And the reason is because once the baby's baptized, the baby can't be rebaptized. And we know that the parents are not going to be raising the child in the Catholic faith, which means there's going to be a slippery slope of theological, moral, etc. issues. Why would the gays be what the homosexuals and the homosexualist movement in the church is trying to do is turn towards the faithful and tug at our heartstrings? Don't you want infants to be saved? Don't you want them to have baptism? Well, yes, I do.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
That's exactly it. Gosh, doesn't it sound like communist propaganda? And that's what they're doing. They're tugging at our heartstrings regarding children so that they can have children of gay couples baptized, which means you're going to have a homosexual couple up at the baptistry suddenly being put down on the baptismal form as parents of the child.
Yep.
On top of that, then they have that promise of raising the child in the Catholic faith. Now, we know what that means.
Right.
We know that it means to talk about, we know what it means to talk about, darn it, sorry, my phone dinged at me and I lost my train of thought. We know what it means for people to see a homosexual couple in the church having a child baptized. On the one hand, we want to say that it's a good thing. However, because they're going to be raising that child in the Catholic faith, what's going to happen afterward is that they're going to have to bring the child to Mass, which means you have a homosexual couple now bringing a child to Mass.
For them, it's all about optics. And
That's
this
right.
is something that I think a lot of people, maybe in this community, in our community, small as it is, but still growing, a lot of things, something that we don't realize. A lot of people who don't really take their faith very seriously put baptism on the same level as they put the godparenting decision, which obviously, even for us, I mean, we take the godparenting decision much more seriously. We have some idea of what that means and what that's about. But even then, for them, this thing that is a sacrament is on the same level as like, oh, well, I want my gay brother and his partner to be godparents. And that has been happening and approved for a long time.
Right.
That's already, because the church doesn't take godparenting decisions very seriously anymore either in most places.
And then what winds
Sadly.
up happening in a lot of these situations, you have somebody who's usually very conservative on a whole lot of things, but then one of their children turns gay. Or then one of their children becomes transgender, or then a brother or a sister or some other relative is a homosexual, and now they're stuck because Thanksgiving is going to be awkward at this point. And gosh, we can't have everybody upset at the dinner table, so something's got to give. And most of the time, their moral stand on homosexuality goes right out the window.
Right. Because
of that.
We need to learn to have uncomfortable Thanksgivings.
Yes.
I think that is a specifically American problem, and not just because of the Thanksgiving. Americans love our ritual and our tradition. We don't have much of a national like ethos, if you will. At first, I mean, the ethos was we're pioneers, and now we're also a melting pot.
Right.
And what else are we? Like freedom and cars and North American football,
hot dogs,
maybe hot dogs, Murphy Brown, whatever. Brown, right? Yeah. I remember the same skit you do. For us, Thanksgiving is like, it's a thing. We want to think of like movies from the 40s, and maybe we're thinking about it starting to snow, and pictures from why can I not remember his name? The Americana artist.
All that is Norman Rockwell.
Norman Rockwell.
Yes.
The absolute wrong name was stuck in my mind for some reason. I was thinking Stanley Kubrick, who is the furthest thing from Norman Rockwell. Also very, Anyway, Americans, you've heard, this is not America shaming. I love America. My father served in the military, and God willing, I could have. It's not about our principles that we agree, or even if we don't agree on exactly what they mean, we're willing to discuss them and fight over them. I'm talking about the specifically American concept of do not discuss religion and politics that came from this more polite but less substantial phase of our history.
Right.
Now, of course, you could argue that today all we do is talk about religion and politics, which is also terrible. It's just way too far in the other direction.
Yeah.
Not everything is political. That is a socialist.
Oh yeah, that's totally
Yeah. If anybody says everything's political, just
run away.
Yeah, it's not. Well, or convince them that it's not, because it is.
Or have an uncomfortable conversation.
Exactly. We need to be willing to have the uncomfortable conversation and say, I love you still, but you're so wrong about this. But we don't have to talk about it. But you are wrong about this. And I know you think I'm wrong about this, and let's just have turkey and watch football.
Yeah, exactly. But,
yeah. The problem comes in not even being willing to do just that little bit. And if you really care about somebody, you can do that. I mean, these things happen in families. I'm sure some of you have it, maybe not about this particular issue, but a lot of issues, just things you disagree on. At Thanksgiving, we don't always have close family that we love and care about. Sometimes it's
Well,
a great aunt
yeah,
or a weird uncle or a, like
that's entirely true.
brother's third wife, and um, these are just things that we have to get better at, and that starts with people like us and people like you, being willing to just gently have the kind of conversations that need to be had, because it's
Right.
not, speaking of the incremental approach, right? This doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly over time,
Gradually.
example upon example, gradually. That's a better word
Mm.
than increment. Incrementally sounds so sinister.
It does.
Gradually sounds like, I don't know. It reminds me of the
Gradations.
what were the two terms that people always confuse? The doctrine of gradualness and the gradual development of doctrine.
Oh, yes, yes.
One is acceptable and the other is absolutely not.
The evolution of doctrine versus the gradual
Yeah,
development of
yes.
doctrine, two totally separate issues. Moving on, one thing that I do want to tell you guys about, especially for all of you in the Washington, D.C. area, there is a small but growing group in the Washington, D.C. area that is coordinating a regular rosary rally for the preservation of the traditional Latin Mass.
Nice.
Currently, there is a plan in place where they are looking to host a very large rosary rally at the end of September. And they want to hold this in front of the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception and also in front of the Papal Nuncio, in order to show on an international level that Traditionis Custodes has failed, and they pushed too hard, too far, and too fast. That they're trying to phase us out entirely, and we're just not having it. So I want to encourage people. I have here, this is an image from a tweet. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. You can see that image right there. If you go to a Twitter page, the Twitter account is DC Rosary Rally. It's all one word. If you look up DC Rosary Rally on Twitter, you'll be able to follow the account and keep up with the updates as they are trying to put together the events week to week leading up to what's going on at the end of September. So that kind of catches you up on what we're doing at Lepanto. Of course, we've got our continuous research going on regarding the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. We're hoping to have everything put together by the end of the month so we can roll out I'm going to start rolling out stories actually next week. I've got a couple of already queued up. So we'll start rolling out stories regarding what we have researched about them. By November, most of them will have trickled out. And then we're going to put out the major report that has everything. It's going to have analytics talking about the percentage of money going out to all of these organizations that are fighting against the church. And we're going to renew our call for the abolition of the CCHD. We will be sending this full report to every bishop in the country. You guys helped us fundraise for that, and we're going to fulfill that promise. So that's going out to every bishop in the country. So moving on to some of the topics that we have, is we scoured the news, and my wife did a bang-up job actually compiling some information for us and giving us some brief summaries. But we just put the articles together, and as we were looking through them, I mean, you just shake your head at some of them, and then at others.
I'm thinking of the one right now that we're about to get to.
Yeah. So, well, the first one we're going to cover, the one we're talking about, you were talking about, we'll get to at the end, because I think that one's really that's the icing on the cake.
Okay.
We'll get to that. The first one I want to talk about is this loss in Wyoming.
Oh, Lord.
And by loss, I mean massive victory.
Yeah, for some, very much lost for one particular person. Poor Liz Cheney.
Poor Liz Cheney. Poor Liz Abraham Lincoln Cheney, who likened herself, if you hadn't seen the clip, she likened herself to Abraham Lincoln, who lost a Senate race and he lost a House race before he won the presidency, as if she's going to run for president and actually win.
They are talking about her running for president. She has talked about running for president. You know, running for president is a game now. you know, a bunch of people run.
Mhm.
They know they're not going to win. They're just trying to get national attention. I feel like, you know, imagine that you're Liz Cheney for a minute in a situation where you knew and you have known for months that this is going to turn against you. You know, it's like a long, contentious divorce,
Oh yeah.
if you will, from the people in your home state. And you are 100% sure that you are right and that those people, as well-meaning as they might be, are absolutely wrong. You know, how do you feel a few days, a week
Mhm.
after you don't just get over it?
Right.
Like the event happens and it feels inevitable, and you start to look at it psychologically as a necessary step in my evolution into whatever it is that Liz Cheney is going to become
Oh
next.
right. Yeah.
Maybe she'll become a Democrat in the end when it all falls apart and she has nowhere else to go.
She's basically a Democrat anyway.
Well, you know,
Socially speaking, anyway.
you know what I mean about, you know, she'll
Yeah.
join the party officially if
I mean, for
things
crying out
don't go
loud,
her way, and they
Mitt
will not go her
Romney
way.
was never a Republican.
No.
He was always a Democrat in a Republican suit.
He's King Rhino.
Yeah, and what's his name from Arizona?
McCain?
Yeah, John McCain, who used to be a Democrat, became a Republican. No, he didn't become a Republican. He
No.
started running on the Republican ticket because it was the only way he was going to get elected in Arizona, because Arizona is a Republican state.
Right.
So,
Which, to be fair, you know, not that John McCain needs us to be fair to him. He is in the eyes of the Lord now, and he's going to get whatever, you know. I don't know as much about the man as some others, but you make a good point in this sense that he didn't move. Politics moved around him.
yep.
To his credit, he never pulled a Biden and I'm pro-life, except, oh, well, now I'm not. You know, John Kerry was pro-life, except
No,
whoops,
he always
now I'm
told
not.
us what he
know.
was. I mean,
Right.
which was nominally pro-life.
And I think there is something honorable in principle, if not in practice, when you, because this is the whole game, if you want to call it a game, with the John McCainites and the people who look to them as kind of like the founder of their movement.
right.
He's this guy who stood on his principles no matter what. And I don't know if that's actually, again, I don't know if that's actually true in practice. That is the view that people like Liz Cheney and others of that kind, they want, you know, they want John McCain to be their guru.
Well, you know
from
what it
beyond,
reminds
you
me
know?
of? It reminds me of the old philosophical canard that you and I used to get faced with in college, the Hans and Franz situation. Which one was the unjust man? The one who acts viciously, knowing that he's acting viciously,
Right,
or the one who acts viciously out of cowardice?
right.
So, the question of which is which, I think that it is an interesting conversation, but
Right. For our purposes, all that matters is there is a perception that being a middle of the roader who stays where you are while the waves of politics move around
Moderates.
you.
I'm moderate because I sit on a fence and I don't take a stance one way or the other necessarily.
I have a very dear friend who I'm not going to mention who is not Catholic, takes the view, probably not the person you're thinking of. This person takes the view that, I mean, almost like the old skeptics, right? Like almost like Socrates, but a little further, right? The idea that, like, well, my main virtue is that I'm questioning everything all the time and I never come down on one position, which not only does this make them a hypocrite, because of course everybody comes down on positions. Nobody who tells you that they don't, right? But it puts a weird kind of impetus on the urge to find the middle and say, well, you're right, but also you're right. And can't we all just, you know, like we'll talk, like for them, discussion is the value,
right?
You know,
I'm just going to put this right up there because I think that kind of sums up exactly what we're talking about.
That's it. There you go.
Yep. Be not lukewarm.
You know, in our theoretical Thanksgiving dinner, this person at first is not opposed to having discussion that's uncomfortable,
Right.
but doesn't ever intend to let it be uncomfortable.
Right.
They value discussion because for them, discussion is a sign of virtue,
Right.
not a virtue signal exactly, although it can be used.
It could be used that way. Yeah.
But for them, having a discussion is as far as we can get because, we don't really know anything. We can't possibly make a moral call, an ethical judgment. There's no objective truth after all, or if there is, we'll never know it. So, these people are so frustrating because they can be so nice, but
Sure.
they're shooting themselves and everybody else in the feet
Well,
again and again and again.
The analogy I always used when we were in college was trying to nail Jello to the wall.
Did we try to do that in college?
No, it was always the analogy that we used, though. Because at the end of the day, you can't actually have a good conversation with somebody who refuses to engage.
Right. Everything's theoretical.
Yeah, everything's theoretical. Well, maybe, I don't know, I guess. And you sit there and you want to say, but here's absolute truth. Here is something that we can have a solid, at least a foundation for discussion on. I got into it with several people who said there is no such thing as absolute truth. There is no such thing as a universal truth.
Then why are we talking?
Then I guess words have no meanings.
What's the point? Right.
To
them, they don't.
Right.
That's the point of redefining the conversation, because to them, and I don't, again,
boy doesn't mean boy
we're
anymore.
speaking about them and they and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not meaning to, put everybody, this side or that side, but people put themselves where they put themselves,
sure.
And they don't see a problem with telling you a lie, with winning being the ultimate goal, because they feel that a certain thing is right.
Mm-hmm.
But there are no principles that can't be violated, even though some might make you feel really uncomfortable. You should feel really uncomfortable about doing this thing, right?
My mom says, I like a good fight, LOL.
No, she does.
Yes. Thanksgivings were never uncomfortable at my house because we were always fighting and nobody had time to be uncomfortable.
Thanksgiving.
No, I'm kidding.
Thanksgiving was just another Thursday.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Oh my.
At least we had football to keep us going.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I used to be a Redskins fan. Now I'm a nothing fan. I'm not rooting for those guys.
You don't have a team.
I have no one. No.
Your team is gone. So anyway, Liz Cheney, she lost. She didn't lose. Right. She got demolished. 66% went to Hagman,
mm-hmm.
And Cheney only garnered 28% of the vote. 28%. That's nothing. That's minuscule. That's whatever Democrat hangovers they could get to come over into the Democrat or into the Republican primary to vote for her in order to try and boost her numbers.
Which in Wyoming was probably like horses.
Probably. and
horses to vote.
All the cemeteries.
Horses and cemeteries. And the thing is, Wyoming, small population and people, it's not a big deal. It's just a few people. I mean, proportionately, though, it still matters. It still makes a difference.
A lot.
That her position was repudiated, and it was repudiated, I think, too, because she was largely, and she made herself this, a one-issue candidate, and that issue was Trump bad.
Donald Trump,
right.
Yep.
Even if you don't love everything Trump did, even if you think Trump bad,
right,
that is not going to win you an election.
Yeah,
not anymore.
Not only is it not going to win you an election, I want to bring up this statistic because I think it's interesting.
Sure. Yep.
Trump's endorsement record. This is his record for how many politicians that he has endorsed that won their primaries versus how many he endorsed that lost.
I didn't know this one.
Trump has endorsed and won 188 primaries, and he endorsed and lost 19.
Ooh.
19. Ooh. That is a massive influence. Now, when people say that the Republican Party is the party of Donald Trump, they're not wrong in at least in this sense, that Donald Trump has an incredible amount of influence when it comes to who's going to win primary elections. He is now the new kingmaker of the Republican Party. And honestly, I'm not so sure that that's a bad thing. I'm not so sure I want him to run as president. I'd much rather see someone like Ron DeSantis in the White House. I like a lot of Trump's positions, but unfortunately, there was a really interesting article that I saw earlier this week where they talked about Donald Trump or the reason why the Department of Justice and the FBI were running these constant investigations of Donald Trump
Right.
from the beginning of his presidency.
Mm-hmm.
And what was pointed out is that he couldn't fire anybody at the DOJ or at the FBI while they were investigating him. So in order to keep him from draining the swamp, they
They
had to
just
keep
kept
him under
investigating.
perpetual investigation.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. So when I read
makes a
this
lot of
article and it started putting the pieces together, suddenly everything started to make a whole lot of sense. And this is also why they sent that raid in at Mar-a-Lago earlier this week to try, or was it last week?
Last week? Just
Last week.
Interesting note on that. The same the people, some of the people responsible for the Mar-a-Lago raid, the guy, I forget who it was. One of the people, not Merrick Garland, but one of the other people who signed off on it, and not the judge, who is not the judge who's an Epstein friend.
Oh yeah.
These people are so connected to one another. I mean, in a way, it's like a Habsburg dynasty kind of problem.
Kind of a negative.
It may
Habsburg.
not be a conspiracy. It might just be that there's so few of them relative to the rest of us that they're all just connected through money and nonsense. But another person who is, and I wish I could remember this fellow's position or his name, who was instrumental in the Mar-a-Lago raid, was also in charge of the Russian collusion investigation.
Yep.
They just tapped the same guy who failed.
I
can't, if you were the worst kind of Democrat who wanted the Russia collusion thing, you knew it was fake and you went for it because you just wanted to hurt Trump.
Right.
Even if you're that person, you have to admit it failed.
Oh,
you
sure.
didn't hurt Trump. You didn't hurt the Republicans, certainly.
Right.
So why go back? Why keep dipping at the same well? Right? Like, why keep hiring the same workman that, puts holes in your roof and then it's like, oh, it's raining. Whoops. And then takes your money, leaves, and then you're stuck with, why would they keep doing this?
Why would they keep dipping into that same? Yeah.
I don't understand the reasoning. And I feel like the Democratic Party is so terminally disorganized.
I don't think it's disorganization. I actually think that it has to do with who they can control because they've got dirt on whoever they have. So when you look at this judge,
certainly there's an element of that happening.
When you have this judge who is an Epstein aficionado,
they go and wave some pictures in front of him, and he does whatever they want.
And they say, "You're going to do what we want, otherwise." ... So yeah, it works.
Their tactics are sound, but their strategy they don't seem to have one, like you said.
Right.
At least, so the deep state raids Trump continuously, and investigates him at all times, so they can't fire anybody.
Right.
Makes sense. But the Mar-a-Lago raid made no sense to me.
It seemed like a fishing expedition. I think that what they were trying to do is they're trying to perpetuate this investigation.
Right. Put it out in the public so that the public sees, oh, look, Trump's been investigated.
Yep.
And nothing happened. Just next week we'll do something else.
And there was speculation that they were probably going to plant some evidence somewhere. But at the same time, the problem is Trump apparently recorded the entire thing. He had everything on film.
So here's something. I read an article a couple days after it happened. Then I couldn't find it again. It's not that it disappeared exactly. It's just not anywhere.
Right.
That they had received a tip-off.
Oh, yes.
Maybe one of you can find it somewhere. I didn't look that
I remember
hard.
seeing
I don't
it.
mean to imply that there's a conspiracy covering it up. Maybe there was.
Right.
I don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is somebody tipped them off that Trump was keeping the documents they wanted in his safe.
Right.
And when they went in the safe, it's not only that the documents weren't there, it's that the safe was empty.
Yep.
Which, if I were a conspiratorial man, I would think Trump tipped them off so that they would raid Mar-a-Lago, find nothing, and look real stupid.
That's funny.
Because it is pretty predictable what happens when you give them tips like that.
Let's take that to its logical
Do not
conclusion.
bet on that, anyone, please.
And
just a fun idea.
Good thought experiment. Let's take it to its conclusion. Suppose you don't really trust your Secret Service detail.
And why would you?
Right. And suppose
Better hire Blackwater.
you decided that you were going to talk to various members of your Secret Service detail
Mhm.
and say, I got this stuff and it's here in my safe. Or you go to another one, you say, I got this stuff and it's over in this other safe. Or you talk to another one.
It's
so
in the trunk of my car.
It's in the
and then
trunk.
you see where they raid. And
That's
then you know
right.
who not to trust.
That's right.
Clever. That's how the
Maybe.
mafia does it.
Yeah.
And you can't be a businessman in New York unless you know how the mafia works. So
This is true.
well.
Okay. All right. One comment that was brought up that I do want to address real quick is there was some commentary about Dr. Oz, and he's not 100% pro-life. He's not pro-life at all.
Dr. Oz
he's barely
is a
pro-life.
Trump endorsement that I really strongly dislike.
Yep.
Was
not one I liked at all.
I don't want to lose the Senate. I don't want to lose the House, but I certainly don't want to see more rhinos.
Right.
I mean, and not that I am like, hey, diehard Republican, and I am not,
Mhm.
but it's the best of our, look, we've been round and round so many times with so many people about like, should we vote for a principled third party or should we vote for one of these other two because it's the better chance? I don't know. I don't think there's a correct answer. I think it's situational.
It's prudential.
But I know that if people like Dr. Oz get into positions of power, unless a miracle happens, when we know miracles happen, but you can't expect them in every situation, we do not want people, and I'm not saying we want, sloganeering ideologues that will push all the worst buttons that the right has. And, I don't necessarily want them either. I'm just saying.
Oh, and I don't want to give the impression
principles matter.
Yeah. I don't want to give the impression that I think that Trump is right in a lot of these appointments. The only reason that I'm bringing this up is to show that his track record of endorsements and the success that he's seeing because of those endorsements is a very strong indication that he really and truly is a kingmaker.
Right.
Which,
as you said, that's the best role for him.
Yeah.
I think.
He just needs good advisors on who to endorse and who not to.
Right.
So moving on, and because we have about 20 minutes, and I think we can probably cover this topic throughout 20 minutes because it's a really crazy story.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
I want to start. This goes back to when you and I were in college.
Mm-hmm.
The story.
Nailing Jello to the wall. We have
nailing Jello to the wall because we love torturing ourselves. In 1997, so you and I were in a class, and the class was current events, and part of the course, we were supposed to go and just kind of sift through various news stories and look at things that were going on. We would be assigned different genres.
And I want to break in for a second and let everybody know this was a course that Mike Hitzborn convinced them to have.
Yes.
Because he wanted to, what he's doing right now, he wanted to do back then. And we were all roommate, he went to me and a couple of other roommates and like, you know what, we should go and pitch for this current events course because our political science department doesn't have anything like that. And I think we could convince this professor to do that, and gosh darn it, we did. And
yes,
we had
a
class that had about 10, 12 people in it. They had it for a couple of years.
It was a great class.
It was a great class, and I wish they still had it.
I do too.
Because I just wish they still had it. Anyway, carry on.
So it was kind of run like a strategy newsroom where what they do. So if you know anything about a think tank, or if you know anything about the way a think tank strategy room or even a senatorial strategy room works, what they do is they have interns go and they scour all of the news stories. They pick various topics. So they'll have one person assigned to international news. Right. They'll have somebody else assigned to technology. They'll have somebody else assigned to pro-life or abortion or whatever it is, LGBT. And what they do is they scour the headlines. They scan the headlines, they come up with topics, and they figure out which topics would be the most interesting for a particular senator or for the think tank to cover, depending upon what the idea was. And then you have to summarize the story. You don't rewrite it, you just summarize it. So you have to be able to speak intelligently about what the gist of the story is, who the key players are, why it's important or why it's relevant, and that kind of thing. So I was assigned the technology desk. And I was scanning the news and I saw this headline, and the headline was "Headless Frogs Call for a Leap of Faith." And I mean, I just looked at that and I went, "Headless frogs? What in the world?" And
we have the actual article.
we have
here,
the
by
actual
way.
article. Here's a brief summary that my lovely wife put together for me. In October of 1997, scientists at Bath University revealed that they had created headless frog embryos, in essence, excuse me, an organ sac. These embryos were not allowed to live for more than a week, but the idea was to eventually transfer the technology to support organ transplants in humans. And then the Irish Times, around that same time, had an article. The headline was "Expert Predicts Headless Clones Will Be Used for Human Organs." So here's the summary of that one. Dr. Dixon of Bath University said, and I quote, "I predict that there will be great pressure to combine cloning technology with the creation of partial fetuses, missing heads, arms, or legs, as organ factories for tomorrow's people. These will be developed on an experimental level somewhere in the world, in countries where there is little or no gene legislation, within the next 5 or 10 years because of the overwhelming demand." Now, this is just a little bit of background in what I'm going to tell you in just a minute. But do you remember the conversation in class, and then for weeks afterward, that we had?
Because it's so
It was
it's so
so
interesting
bizarre.
when it was in the future, this
Right.
thing that hasn't happened yet. All
That's
these
like
conversations about
2050.
what counts as a human, and what if you
Yeah.
did this and that, and about the cloning, and yeah, I remember the conversations. And then it wasn't 5 or 10 years.
No.
It was about 25 years. But
So here's the new one.
mhm,
Startup wants to copy you embryo organ harvest for embryo organ. Embryo startup wants to copy you for embryo organ harvesting. And here's the brief summary on it. In August of 2022, a biotechnology company based in Israel intends to create embryo clones of humans to be used for harvesting tissue for transplant treatments. Jacob Hanna, a biologist of Weizmann Institute of Science, recently presented his research creating headless mouse embryos using mouse stem cells, no sperm, egg, or uterus. His lab grew them into embryos outside or inside mechanical wombs until they had beating hearts, flowing blood, and cranial folds. In Hannah's words, the vision of the company is, can we use these organized embryo entities that have early organs to get cells that need to be used for transplantation? We view it as perhaps a universal starting point. This is insanity. This is absolutely insane. But back in 1997, when we first started talking about this, some of our friends were saying, "Oh, this will never happen."
right.
And
We don't want it to happen.
we didn't want it to happen, but here we are.
Here we are.
And so if you think about what this means, it's worse than abortion in many respects, because by genetically flipping a switch so that a human embryo doesn't develop a head, doesn't develop arms or legs, but basically grows a torso,
right,
that could then be used for organ harvesting. They also talked about something that you found regarding accelerated growth.
Right. So this is something that's really interesting about the article. And I want to get back to those ethical issues in just a second. But there's two things in the article that hint at technology that, we we're so wrapped up in everything else that we're doing. We have to remember these things are coming. One of them you just said, a mechanical womb,
Right.
which of I mean, in like most technologies, these things can be used for good or not. The obvious good of a mechanical womb is a woman who is like 3 months pregnant, dies in a car accident or has some other problem, and they can save the baby. Right. Take the baby out, put it in a right. Obviously not the ideal thing to do, but like to have something on hand that could, or the proverbial 14-year-old rape victim who, she's gonna get the abortion, and the doctors say, well, but what about this? Now there's obviously ethical conundrum issues there, right? But it's a stopgap. It's an option between let the baby die or.
So there's a moral
Don't,
argument
right?
to be made.
It reminds me of the argument of like all the frozen embryos,
Mm-hmm.
and the church has tentatively okayed you adopting and birthing a frozen embryo because it's gonna
yes and
die
no. I mean,
otherwise, right? Like
there-
there's an argument to be made one way or the other.
It's not definitive.
by no
The church
means.
is not
Yeah.
ruled on this.
By no
It's-
means
yeah.
is it definitive, but it's one of those cases where there's a thing to talk about here.
Yes. Well, it's something
Um,
that needs to be talked about because there are real human beings that are put on ice.
And how do
that-
we save these lives? What
Right.
are we allowed to do?
Mhm.
I know we can't, proportionality and whatnot. We can't
Right.
we
You
cannot
can't-
commit an evil to produce a good, but is there a way to, anyway, I would much rather have those discussions as an option
Right.
than, nothing at all. But what they're going to do with mechanical wombs.
Oh,
and
of
it's
course.
not that.
Yep.
You
It's
know.
cloning.
It's cloning.
I mean, how many
Um,
science fiction movies have you and I personally watched together where
That's-
you see the guy,
Right.
he walks into a hallway and he's got just that after that on
Right.
either side where
various stages
various
of
stages of
development,
development where it's you've got little babies growing in these jars, and then you've got fully grown human beings floating around in these big
X-Files,
vats.
Matrix,
yes,
Alien 4, all that. Yeah.
Yep.
That's just tons of them. Yeah.
they've been signaling this for decades that this is. There was a movie back in the 70s called Clonus.
Do not watch Clonus. But
Yes. It's it's a
remember
really
being-
bad science fiction.
It's just terrible.
It's just a bad
yeah, it's
sci-fi
not-
movie. It starred the guy from Mission Impossible.
Graves.
Robert
Okay.
Graves.
Yep.
He starred in the film, and the idea was that there was an island where people were being grown as clones, and then they would take these clones and harvest their organs when it was needed. So each person on the island was the clone of some person out in the world.
And if this sounds familiar, they remade it as a movie called
Yeah.
The Island with
Right.
Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson in
Right.
2010 or something. Also a
Yeah.
terrible movie.
Yeah, they're all bad. I mean, a lot of these science fiction
Yeah.
movies are pretty. Peter Graves, Peter Graves, not
Peter
Robert
Graves, I'm
Graves.
sorry.
Thank
not
you.
Robert Graves, yeah.
But
We're too young.
yeah, well, I should have known better.
Me too. I'm blaming it on our relative youth, but it's not that.
Yeah, relative.
Yeah.
So
Don't look.
yeah. But the point is that this is science fiction stuff.
Yeah.
This is stuff they've been signaling in the science fiction realm for a long time. Now, I have a theory.
We can't get floating cars, but we do get
Yeah.
mechanical wombs for cloning.
Well, my theory is that one of the reasons that abortion has been so heavily protected as a medical industry for so long
Yeah.
is because they have been trying to develop cloning technology
Sure.
for the very purpose that we're talking about now, being able to harvest organs and perpetuate life. They want to create immortal life here on earth by continually replenishing the organs in your body that get diseased or they get damaged or whatever
Because
happens.
humanism says you
Right.
can't die. You just can't die.
That's right.
Anything to get. And this is, we've just, human, embryonic like body part sales has been only in the news for the last few years,
Right.
but it's been going on for decades.
Oh,
it's not
decades.
new. It's a huge industry. In addition, IVF, you cannot do IVF if you recognize, in vitro fertilization, you can't do it if you recognize that you're creating a bunch of tiny human beings and most of them die for the one that lives,
Right.
right? That suddenly becomes unethical if you think, as we all do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now here's another industry, and granted, it's just a startup. Like I said, maybe the technology's not there yet. This one in Israel, maybe they're just trying to
No,
scam
well,
people to
they're-
get money. I don't know, but if it's not here now, it will be here very, very soon.
The technology for mice, at
Um,
least, is. They've been able to do it in mice, and they've been able to do it in
Right.
frogs. Concomitant with this is that now there's a tech company, and not a tech company. What is it? The International Stem Cell Research. What is it? The
Mhm.
I can't. I can't.
While you look for that, I was going to
Yeah.
mention one other thing,
Yeah, go
which
ahead.
is the other technology that was mentioned in the article, not in the article, actually in an article
There it
covering
is.
the article, talks about growing these headless infants at an accelerated timescale.
Right.
Can we do that? Like, can they put,
Growth hormones.
a 5-year-old, in a chamber and then push the fast forward button and they come out a year later and they're 20? Like, is this how, obviously they can't do something like that, but the fact that they are experimenting with this,
Mm-hmm.
what are they not experimenting with? Somebody somewhere, any horror you can imagine
Right.
is being perpetrated somewhere at this point.
Yep.
It's and it's all, transhumanism has been a push
Oh yes.
for a long time, and it's not
Yep.
just like, I want to have cat ears, I want to have a tail, I want blue
Mhm.
skin. It's not funny, it's not fun sci-fi stuff, it's horrific sci-fi stuff,
Right.
like we're talking about here. And in terms of the ethics of it, to be clear, they're not talking about, as bad as even this would be, taking a sperm or an egg and modifying those things so that a head is not possible to be grown.
No, they're taking a
They
clone.
are making an embryo,
Mm-hmm.
then editing it after it is clearly,
Well, they're not even taking an embryo. What
No.
they're doing is they're taking tissue samples, and they're reprogramming those tissue samples so that they can create an embryo based on
right,
those tissue
but an
samples.
embryo is being created, is the
Yes.
point, and they are modifying the existing embryo. So, I mean, because as odd and weird as this discussion seems, it gets down in some ways to the question of, is a human being created? Does a conception occur
Mhm.
and is then modified?
So-
or does the modification occur before, in which case, is it even a conception? Or are you just basically making huge skin cells and then turning them into livers?
Right.
Right?
They're not
We
quite.
don't know. And we're,
Well, we kind of do, because what's happening when you clone somebody.
the article doesn't tell us. I
The-
think we can
so-
certainly surmise.
I do know
what's
enough
gonna
about
happen.
cloning technology to be able to say this.
Mhm.
When you clone somebody, what you're doing, you're not taking egg and sperm. You are reprogramming the nucleus of an egg.
Right.
You are inserting DNA into an egg. So you take an egg, you take DNA from whatever source you want,
Right.
give it the new nucleus, and then that cell starts to divide.
Right.
And when that happens, it starts to produce a new entity.
Right.
So it's not conception in the way that we would normally think
Right.
of
I
it.
mean, the term's a shorthand, like we need a new word.
Right.
for it,
But
sadly.
it is the creation of a new entity, a new
Right.
living being. When
Right.
they cloned that sheep Dolly.
I remember.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when they cloned Dolly
Right
also.
around the time of that article, I think.
It only lived for it lived for a short amount of time. It didn't live
Okay.
a normal full life. And what they found is that it had accelerated aging. So I think part of what you're talking about here with the accelerated aging has to
Mhm.
do with the cloning process.
I see. So they're part and parcel.
It's part and parcel, but at the same time, maybe also what they're doing is pumping it with growth hormones. So you've got the growth
Right.
hormones mixed in with the accelerated aging that comes with the cloning process already.
Well-
But if I were to take a skin cell from you and implant the nucleus into an egg so that it created the new embryo,
Right.
that's not you anymore.
No.
It is now a
It's,
new entity.
right.
It would be a new person,
Right.
because as that cellular division takes place, we can say, yes, there is motion, which means there is life. If there is life, there must be a soul.
Right.
If it is a human soul, then it is an immortal soul. So this idea that they would then suppress the development of the head and arms and legs
Right.
and create an organ sac means that you are creating a disabled human being for the purpose of stealing their organs and using them for other people.
Right.
And that's the
Right.
the gravely immoral aspect of all of this.
Right, which is where I was saying there is no way to ethically do this procedure is the point. Like
Exactly.
there's no super science method by which you can, make not a human being happen.
Right.
It must be a human being at some point.
Right.
And scientific theologians can debate about exactly when that is, but at some point it must happen for them to be able to do what they're talking about doing. And so this is a firm no-go situation.
Mhm.
Again, it reminds me of and maybe nothing will come of it, but it does remind me of in vitro fertilization, in that people with a lot of money want to solve a problem for themselves,
Right.
and they're going to solve that by marketing it to poorer people
Mhm.
to pay for the process to get it off the ground and have the experimentation done on others, and then Bill Gates gets his extra livers.
Right.
Or whatever it is that he wants to live on to 500 years old and
Or
buy all
Pope
the
Francis
farmland
gets
and have
his
us eat bugs. And yeah.
new colon.
There's a science fiction story. If anybody wants to write it.
Yeah, there you go.
The Pope that
Cyber
couldn't
Pope.
die. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Gosh, isn't that one of the things I keep reminding people? Pope Francis isn't immortal. We just have to survive him. And now it's wow.
Pray for poor
we
Pope
went
Francis to
there.
not be immortal.
Yes.
Well, it's like when Pope Michael II died.
Oh yeah.
The other day. If people aren't familiar with Michael II, Pope Michael II, just look him up. I don't know.
So the other aspect of this is something that my wife texted me later.
Sure.
She sent me an article from the Epoch Times. The headline is Pro-Abortion Absolutism and Its Consequences. I kind of skimmed the article and I don't really know that I got what the author was going for. However, she said this. The writer mentions that the International Society for Stem Cell Research has repealed the 14-day rule. The 14-day rule is that all experimentation with regard to the development of an experimented on embryo will end after 14 days. So 14 days, they destroy the embryo.
Which I'm sure they think is a great concession to people.
Oh,
like
I
us,
know.
right?
It's not.
They're like, well, we're stopping after 14 days. You can't possibly believe it's a human
Yeah.
before that. Like, sorry guys.
So
nice try.
They repealed the 14-day rule, which requires experimentation to cease after 2 weeks. This change is laying the legal framework for fetal farming. Vermont and Colorado have already asserted that fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses have no rights under state law. Here's the real issue that's going on with all of this wrapped up together. We are going to commoditize embryos. We've already commoditized them to a certain point because people can now do that whole rent-a-womb thing where you've got the gay couple that goes to a surrogate and says, hey, we want to have a baby, but obviously we can't. So would you?
Hey, it's 2022. They can do what they want.
Oh, okay. So they have the surrogate who then rents out the womb so that they can birth a child and give it to the gay couple. So in a sense, there is a commoditization with regard to children in that respect.
Sure.
However, by eliminating the 14-day rule and by creating a clone, what happens is if I were to take your skin cell and create the little clone of the little Andy so that I can make organs for you so that when you get into a car accident or I shoot you because I'm so angry, we can then just take the organ and put it into you.
Right.
Under the law, because the clone is of you, the law would say it is a part of you.
Right.
And so this person, we are right back into the sale of human flesh like we were in the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s.
Child slavery has always been popular. We're just being very creative with it now.
More than creative, it's downright murderous.
Yeah. Creative is a nice way to say demonic.
Yeah.
Well, on that note.
Right. So anyway, we do have a lot to pray for. It seems that the more we gain in the spiritual realm and the more Our Lady leads us forward in fighting against the culture of death. We did just have this victory against Roe versus Wade. The fight's not over. We have to continue praying our rosary every day, wear the brown scapular, make sure that we are fulfilling Our Lady's request by making the 5 first Saturdays. Everything that we do has to be directed toward the salvation of our souls and the salvation of those that God puts in our path. And please God that we will continue that fight. You will continue that fight. And as we pray for you, we ask that you please pray for us. And with that, let's go ahead and close with our prayer. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen.
All right, everybody. God bless you all. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.